Samuel P. Huntington, who is an American a political scientist, puts it well. He says the West won the world not by the superiority of its ideas or values or religion, but rather by its superiority in applying organized violence. Westerners often forget this. So it was their knack, it was their prowess at organized violence that actually had the West ruling over the world. Okay, so what were the other changes that took place within the colonial period? Islamic political economic systems replaced with Western secular systems. It's very interesting to note that when the colonialists entered through pretext of mostly trade, and then they took over lands throughout the world, what they did was not only did they dismantle the institution now, because we're talking about the Muslim world in particular, dismantling and abolishing institutions within the Muslim world, they did not leave a void. They filled up that void with their own institutions. So because you have the possibility of a revival if there is a void, but they didn't even leave that possibility. They replaced them with Western secular systems, the education system, language even, and the social structure replaced with Western alternatives. So throughout the world, Arabic and Persian were spoken throughout the Muslim world. That was completely changed. This had a serious impact on the Muslim psyche. So this acted as a sort of an intellectual and psychological revolution within the Muslim world, and a change, a very big change. It led to the alienation and the amnesia of modern Muslims from their glorious past. So this change in education, this change of language, this change of social structure actually had modern Muslims being completely cut off from their own past. So the other changes, important changes that took place during the colonial period was, of course, the establishment of the State of Israel. Now, General Allenby, who was the British general at that time, when the British took over the Holy Land after defeating the Ottoman Empire through unfair means, as always, lies and betrayal, what happened was when he entered Jerusalem, he proclaimed that today the Crusades have ended, so as to show that the intent, the commonality of intent between the Crusades and the colonial period, we can see that there was a common intent, one of which was, of course, taking over the Holy Land, which is very significant for us in our study of Gog and Magog, because Gog and Magog are obsessed with the Holy Land, and we're going to see that. So what happened was European Jewish populations. So we're talking about European Jewish populations that are different ethnically from Oriental Banu Ishaq. These are different people. We discussed this in the lesson where we studied the Jewish Empire, Khazaria. So these Jewish populations start migrating to the Holy Land, and the Balfour Declaration that ensured British support for the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. So this was a declaration that was passed at that time that ensured that the Jewish homeland would be created in Palestine. So it's interesting to note that in 1917, when this Balfour Declaration was signed that ensured the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, Dr. Muhammad Iqbal, the genius from the Indian subcontinent, wrote beautiful lines of poetry, and he identified Gog and Magog through them. He says, खुल गए याजूज माजूज के लश्कर तमाम चश्माए मुस्लिम देख ले तफसीर हरफ यंसिलून, which means that the tribes, the armies of Yajuj and Majuj have been opened, and now let the eye of the Muslim turn towards the word yansilun. Now this word actually occurs in the Quran in the second place where Gog and Magog are mentioned, which is in Surah Anbiya. So first was we studied Surah Kahf, the second one is in Surah Anbiya, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about a town. He says, وَحَرَامٌ عَلَىٰ قَرْيَةٍ أَهْلَكْنَاهَا أَنَّهُمْ لَا يَرْجِعُونَ. And there is a ban, a prohibition on a city that we have destroyed, that the people of that city will not return to it. So when you study this ayat with a correct methodology, taking the ayat in the context in which it belongs, taking the verses before it, inevitably you will come to the conclusion that this particular city is Jerusalem. And Gog and Magog throughout the Islamic literature, be it in the Quran and even in the Hadith, they are obsessed, they're always linked with the Holy Land and Jerusalem. So when we identify the city of Jerusalem, what is being said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that this city, there was a ban that was placed on this city. The people were exiled from the city, and what happened was they cannot return to that city unless and until Gog and Magog are released. So if we want to identify who Gog and Magog are, we need to know the people who made the Israelites enter back into the city, which is Jerusalem. And when you see history, you see how the process was started by the Crusaders and it was finished, completed by the British. It has been sustained now by the US, and these are the people who Surah Anbiya and these ayat will identify. The word here that is used is hatta iza futihat ya'juj wa ma'juj wa hum min kulli hadabin yansilun. So there you go, you see that word that Allama Iqbal referred to, and this is, you will recognize this event happening in history when the children of Israel returned to this city on which there was a ban that was placed on them, and we know that in history this was when Jerusalem was destroyed for the second time by the Roman Empire, by the Roman army. So easily now we have identified the people who have brought the children of Israel back to the Holy Land as Ya'juj and Ma'juj. That is, at least for this wave that we are studying, the second wave, that is the British and the European powers. Okay, so the other changes that took place during the colonial period, which are of significance to us, is the transfer of wealth and resources to the West. So in the case of India and Africa, resource-rich countries in Africa, and also India is very rich in resources. What happened was there was a transfer of these resources to the West, and in such a way that ensured the financial supremacy of the colonial power. So there were economic reforms that were ensured all of this, and so that the occupied nations always remain dependent and the colonial powers always have their financial supremacy. So how can you ensure something like that? The only way you can do that is by establishing global institutions, like for example the League of Nations that was established, which is a precursor to the United Nations. And through the establishment of these global institutions, a new world order was being set up, which was a global world order where for the first time in history, you're going to have one civilization control the entire globe, all of its resources, all of its institutions, and you're going to have the emergence of a monoculture. Everybody's going to talk the same language, wear the same clothes, believe in the same values, and this is the world order of Gog and Magog.